result of the cost of living pressures at the moment, and have announced one of the largest support packages in Europe, worth around £3,300 per household this year and last.
Ian Benn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The latest report from Which highlights that even supermarkets' own budget brands of food have increased by 26.6%. That the security locks on baby formula milk at the same time as corporations are making vast profits. The government have signed up to the United Nations sustainable goal of eradicating poverty by 2030. Surely now is the time, in light of these commitments, for the Chancellor to act. Will he cap essential food prices and tackle the grotesque profiteering in the food industry that is driving many of my constituents in Liverpool West Derby to poverty?
Chancellor.
Well, I totally respect him for raising the concerns of his constituents in that way. I don't believe capping prices is the right long-term solution, but we are doing a lot, including payments of £900 per household for people on means-tested benefits, £150 per household for households with someone disabled living in them, and £300 for households with pensioners living in them, precisely because we want to help the people that he's talking about. And I will be meeting the regulators next week to talk further about what needs to be done with respect to supermarkets.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, the former Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, spoke about how, before the Brexit referendum, the Bank of England had set out that the likely consequences of Brexit were a weaker pound, higher inflation and weaker growth. Does the Chancellor think it's fair that the UK Government's decision to ignore the stark warnings from the Bank of England are now being paid for by the households who can least afford it?
Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid I don't buy this Brexit narrative from the SNP. Food price inflation has been around 20% in Germany, Sweden, Portugal and Poland in recent times. So this is not a UK-specific issue. We are all dealing with the consequences of Putin's invasion of Ukraine and the aftermath of the pandemic, and we are all tackling it with one central focus, which is to bring down inflation as our overriding priority.
Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The former US Treasury chief said earlier this month that Brexit was a historic economic error and described the UK government's economic policy as having been substantially flawed for a number of years. So will the Chancellor finally face up to what the rest of the world concede and admit that leaving the world's largest single market has not only had a significant impact on inflation, but it's also had a deleterious impact on household finances across the country?
Chancellor the Exchequer.
I think the issue with that argument is that the UK has actually grown faster than France or Italy since we left the single market. And according to the Managing Director of the IMF, the UK economy is on the right track.
Sir Jake Barrett.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my right honourable friend for all he has done for people in Rosendale and Darwin to help them through this cost of living crisis. But people are very concerned with what is being described as the mortgage bomb about to go off. Is now the time for him to look at reintroducing a bold Conservative idea of mortgage interest relief at source? Because if we don't help families now, all the other money that we spent to help them will have been wasted if they lose their home.
Chancellor.
Well, no one could have a more doughty champion in Rossendale and Darwin than my right honourable friend, and I listened to what he says carefully. But I think he will understand that those kind of schemes, which involve injecting large amounts of cash into the economy, right now will be inflationary. So much as we sympathise with the difficulties, and we'll do everything we can to help people seeing their mortgage costs go up, we won't do anything that would mean we prolonged inflation.
SNP spokesperson Stuart Halsey.
Mr. Speaker, the cost of a 2-year fixed mortgage in March 2021 was 2.57%. This week it reached 6%. Now, given the Chancellor and the Economic Secretary have said there are no plans to change the Bank of England inflation target, meaning the base rate which drives the mortgage rate will continue to rise as inflation stays stubbornly high and mortgages will go up. So, in the absence of that change, what is it that the government plan to do to actually tackle the mortgage pain people are suffering from?
Chancellor.
The first thing I would say to him is that what he's talking about is something that's being experienced across the world, and in fact interest rates have risen faster in the United States and Canada than they have here. The answer is we'll look at doing everything we can to help people under pressure, but we won't do things that will prolong the inflationary agony that people are going through. And we have to be very careful, because a lot of the schemes that are being proposed would actually make inflation worse and not better.
Stuart Halsey.
Inflation. The OBR said in March inflation was due to peak at 2.9% at the end of this year. By May, the Bank of England have forecasted it would be 5% at the end of this year, almost double in the space of 2 months. So given an inflation headline is still, 8.7%, food inflation is 16.5%, will the Chancellor guarantee today that inflation will be halved to 5%, as promised by the Prime Minister in January this year?
Chancellor.
The IMF, the OBR and the Bank of England all predict that we will hit our target to halve inflation, and I give him this guarantee: we will stick to the plan to do so.
Right, Gerald Jones.
Question 3, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer this question together with questions number 9 and 10. We recognise that this is a concerning time for homeowners and mortgage holders. We can't ignore the fact, much as though some may wish to, that interest rates have risen across Western economies as a result of the COVID pandemic and the impact of war in Ukraine. The Bank of England sets the base rate, which can have an effect on mortgage pricing, and the bank's been independent since the decision of the then Labour government in 1997. We remain committed to responsible management to bring inflation under control, which is the only sustainable way to lower interest rates and lower mortgage rates.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The former Prime Minister has apologised for the mistakes in her so-called growth plan and the damage it caused. Families across the UK will soon start paying thousands more in mortgage interest payments, and given the Prime Minister's comments yesterday, it appears there's little or no further support coming. So will the Minister join the former Prime Minister and apologise to the nation for the impact of the party opposite's misguided economic experience?
Mr. Speaker, much as though the opposition would prefer this not to be the case, this is a fact that is impacting across Western economies. Although market-to-market comparisons are not always easy, in the United States of America, the average 30-year mortgage has increased now to above 6%. As I said previously, this government will do what it can sustainably to lower interest rates and thereby ease the burden on mortgage holders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the second time that I'm putting it to the government that the Conservatives are no longer the party of home ownership, and I don't think it will be the last time either. And I say this because the average interest rate on a new 2-year fixed mortgage is now above 6%. Now, the Chancellor has already said that they will do everything they can do, but what does this actually mean? Because the public would like to know.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question. Not only are we taking action, taking the tough decisions to sustainably improve the nation's finances, but we're also working, and the Chancellor and I regularly meet with the mortgage industry, with lenders, about the support that they can provide to mortgage holders if they do get into financial difficulties. A range of measures that include term extensions, a switch to interest-only payment holidays, and the FCA guidance is very clear that any repossessions, and they are currently running at a historical low, any repossessions should be an absolute last resort.
Christian Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a result of the 6% we've already heard about, more than 1 million households on flexible rate mortgages have already faced increases this year, and 1.8 million more will see their fixed rate deals come to an end and face increases in this year. And it's not just homeowners. The knock-on effect has meant that in my constituency in Edinburgh, we've had the highest rental inflation anywhere in the country at 13.7% in the last financial year, because landlords are facing increases in their mortgages. Now, the government has said it's willing to support people, so would it be willing to consider the Liberal Democrats' idea of a mortgage protection fund to protect those on lowest incomes and support those who are struggling?
Well, I thank the honourable member for Edinburgh East for her question. Regrettably, the proposal that she and her party puts forward would not only delay the point at which we're able to bear down on inflation to deliver the nation's mortgage holders the lower interest that they need, but it would also, and the honourable member raised the point of private renters, it would do nothing, as I understand their proposal, for the plight of private renters.
Baldwin-Chair of the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the growth plan in September obviously did have an impact on the mortgage market. But is the Economic Secretary aware that by November, when he gave evidence to our committee, the Bank of England governor actually said that the increases in mortgages henceforth were really down to the Bank of England's own increases because that temporary effect from the growth plan had dissipated. And increases since then have been largely due to the fact that inflation has been worse than the bank was forecasting. And did the Economic Secretary note that this week I received a letter from the Chair of Court at the Bank of England saying that they are going to undertake the request that I sent them to have a look at their inflation modelling and why it's been incorrect?
Minister.
Not for the first time, Mr. Speaker. The chair of the Select Committee is on the money in her understanding of what is actually driving the markets and her own advocacy and champion for the fact that our lending banks need to do a good job, not just for mortgage holders, but also for savers. And that's something I'm very happy to meet with the Honourable Lady to talk about how we can do, make sure that they do the best job they can.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister in his earlier reply talked about mortgages in the United States, and he will know that in the United States it is quite common to fix a mortgage for 15 or 30 years, which gives certainty about monthly repayments and, of course, can be refinanced if mortgage rates go down over the period in term of the mortgage. I understand that the UK Treasury looked at the UK mortgage market for introducing such long-term fixed rates and found that at that time there wasn't much potential. Will he consider looking at that again?
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question, as ever, apposite when it comes to Treasury matters. There are indeed, Mr. Speaker, long-term fixed-rate mortgages on the market. I have taken advice from officials on that. The constraining factor is actually consumer demand. That's not a pattern of behaviour that we've seen, but clearly for some mortgage holders that does offer the long-term certainty, and it's certainly my objective that we see the broadest range of choices for householders for their own individual fact patterns in the market.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mortgage payers in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Torque are rightly worried at this moment in time with the impending rebrokering that they are facing. And to support what my right honourable friend, the member for Rosendale and Darwin, said earlier, is it not time to return to a Conservative principle of introducing a MIRAS-type scheme which allows borrowers tax relief for interest payments on their mortgages?
Minister.
I always listen enormously carefully to the very powerful advocacy for Stoke-on-Trent and the fact that his constituents put their trust in this government. But one of the things that they put their trust in is that this government wouldn't come forward with the sort of unfunded spending commitments that we see on the benches opposite that would be disastrous for his constituents because it would see inflation be higher for longer.
Shadow Minister Packmat Fadden.
Mr. Speaker, the only thing that grew as a result of what the government did last September was people's mortgage payments. 2-year fixed rates, now over 6%. Payments for householders up $2,900 over the next year. Has the government learnt the lesson from Minister's decision, and I stress decision, nothing to do with international events, to use the country for a giant economic experiment that hurt homeowners, pushed up interest rates and shook international confidence in the United Kingdom? And if they have, will the Minister now apologise to the householders who are paying the price for that mistake?
Minister.
As ever, I listen very carefully to the right honourable member's rhetoric. I'd ask him if he's learnt the lesson that we saw from the last Labour government that spent its way through the nation's finances and whose most lasting contribution to the economy that we inherited was a note from the previous Chief Secretary saying there is no money left.
Mr. Speaker, back to 2023. This is a real crisis affecting real people as a result of his government's real decisions. Now, figures out today show that the average UK tenant is spending over 28% of their income on rent, and that rents have gone up by over 10% in the past year. Rents are being forced up because the landlords that people rent from are seeing their mortgages go up too, sometimes even faster than mortgages in general. Now, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister were supposed to be the team that would come in and sort everything out. Can the Minister tell us what went wrong?
Minister.
Well, what went right, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that we on this side of the House not only will always focus on the stability of the nation's finances to get inflation and interest rates falling further and faster than the opposition would, but also, even within that envelope, we found fit to find £3,300 on average of support for households last winter and the upcoming winter, something that will make a very significant impact into the difficulties that mortgage holders and renters are facing because of the higher interest rates that are a feature across the Western world.
Rachel Hopkins.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government undertakes extensive assessment of the effectiveness of the sanction regimes, which are eroding Russia's financial base. We have 28 Russian banks covering 80% of Russia's banking sector sanctioned, and over 18 billion of Russian assets, and implemented unprecedented trade sanctions in addition to that.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in Luton South have raised concerns about the financial sanctions regime with me. So can the Government confirm if it's still the case that Russian account holders in the UK can hold £50,000 or more in their accounts? And what is to prevent individuals of concern simply parcelling up assets through proxies into a large network of accounts below the permitted level?
Minister.
Well, the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation works very closely with our allies across the G7 to ensure that we have coordinated action amongst our international partners on this unprecedented package of sanctions. We've frozen the assets of 1,600 individuals and entities. We've implemented 35 different sanction regimes across government. I'd be very happy to address the specific question she's asked, because obviously that is quite technical. I'm very happy to take it away for her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A multi-million-pound start-up project that could be transformational in my constituency is now at risk because the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation is yet to process an asset freeze licence application in respect of just 0.002% of the company's capital, which was submitted in April. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure that such applications are dealt with swiftly? And if I provide him the details of the company, will he ensure that its progress is expedited?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to take up my right honourable friend's case. We have expanded the OFSI resources. We have a monthly monitoring and efficiency dashboard. But I accept very much how frustrating it can be for constituents' businesses when such situations arise, and I'm very happy to take it away and swiftly get back to him.
Shadow Minister James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, as the war in Ukraine continues, we must not let up for a second on efforts to tighten the net on the accomplices and beneficiaries of Putin's regime. Now, we welcome the direction of the measures announced yesterday. So can the Minister confirm whether these measures will close all loopholes, and specifically ownership thresholds, which Russian oligarchs and their enablers have been able to exploit to evade the bite of sanctions?
Minister.
What I can say to the honourable gentleman, this government will be relentless in its pursuit of illicit assets. We've, as I said, sanctioned 24 banks with global assets of over 940 billion. And 120 elites with a combined net worth of over 140 billion. And working closely with our allies, incrementally and sequentially, we've tightened that net. And we've immobilised over 60% of Putin's war chest of foreign reserves, worth £275 billion. We continue to work closely with our allies to intensify those as opportunities arise.
Robert Sims.
I have one or two constituents in Poole who've lost their job because they were in companies which were owned by Russians that were sanctioned, and they've been finding difficulty having an orderly wind-up because banks run a mile from loaning a reasonable amount of money to sort out some of the businesses. And I know one situation where people haven't been able to get P60s because they haven't been able to pay the accountants who would have produced them, because they can't get money from any of the banks because they don't want to be involved in anything to do with sanctions. So perhaps I may have a word with the individual about that, with the minister, because I do think in some cases we're going over the top and it's affecting our constituents.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I think the points raised demonstrate how serious and extensive the government actions are in regard to this. But I recognise the unfortunate situations that sometimes arise, and I'm very happy to look at that case and take it back to office.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuing the issue of proxies raised by my honourable friend, the member for Luton South, am I right in thinking that what the Minister said a few minutes ago was that he was prepared to examine the possibility of taking action against proxies and those persons of interest who use proxies?
What I would say is this government is committed to an ever tighter grip on illicit finance and those individuals close to Putin who make a material contribution to his regime. Obviously, on the floor of the House, I'm not going to commit to individual extensions to what we've already done, but I've set out the range of sanction regimes that exist across multiple departments of government, and I'm very happy to receive representations on whatever case he wishes to bring to me.
Bob Black.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Well, my honourable friend is a strong champion in support of consumers who've suffered financial loss, particularly through his chairmanship of the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. He understands that the UK does not operate a zero-loss regime where consumers of financial services are automatically compensated, but it is important that regulators make very clear where the scope of protection lies and who is eligible for compensation.
Rob Blackman.
I thank my honourable friend for that answer, and clearly it's important that where the Ombudsman recommends that compensation be paid, clearly banks have to do so. But equally, the government, of course, should also pay compensation when the Parliamentary Ombudsman found against them in terms of extra life policy holders, as mentioned by the honourable member for Strangford. I understand that the budget to pay compensation to extra life policy holders is some £300 million underspent. So will he, rather than return the money to the Treasury, use that money to compensate the people that have suffered in the long term as extra life policy holders?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we set out the terms of that settlement in 2010, and there's nothing to update the House on today.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, for over 5 years I've campaigned on behalf of steelworkers who were part of the British Steel pension scheme. Many were ripped off by sharks posing as financial advisors. Now, whilst the redress scheme is now in place, legal advisors for steelworkers report claim processing delays of 6 months at the Financial Conduct Authority, 12 months at the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, and 2 years at the Financial Ombudsman's Service. That's just not right. Cases being delayed can have a big impact on possible payouts. So will the Minister please look into the performance of these organisations? Steelworkers and other financial consumers deserve much better than this.
Yes, I will. I've had conversations with my honourable friend, honourable member, previously about that, and I will take up the case of unwarranted delays if that's the case.
Alexander Stafford.
Number 8, sir. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this with number 15. I've set out our national ambition to be the world's next Silicon Valley, and we are making good progress, last year being ranked as the world's 3rd largest technology market after the United States and China.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ultimate Battery and Thurcroft in Rother Valley are developing new groundbreaking battery technologies and are on track to create 500 new jobs by 2025. What help can the Minister's Department give me and also my constituents to help burgeoning tech businesses such as Ultimate Battery to make sure that Rother Valley and across the north are technology hubs?
Chancellor.
Well, I'd like to thank him for his support in Rother Valley for this really important sector, and we do have a number of schemes. There's £541 million of funding in the Faraday Battery Challenge that's available, and we also have the £1 billion Automotive Transformation Fund. But as a result of the efforts that he and many others have made, we're now getting 40% of our electricity from renewable sources. That's the second highest in Europe, with much more progress to come.
Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently convened a roundtable in my constituency between the Science Minister and a number of science and tech businesses, and their number one ask was what fiscal support was available for their sector. Now, I'm aware that there are numerous schemes of grants and tax relief, but it was notable to me that this was not well understood by the businesses, and I couldn't find it published anywhere on the new department's website either. So could I ask my right honourable friend to put together and publish a package of all the support that is available to investors and to innovators, and how that these can be applied for, so that we can maximise the potential of this vital new frontier in West Berkshire and beyond?
It's a very fair point, and I want to first of all thank her for the fact that Newbury is a hotbed of technology businesses. I think you've got Rock Technologies, Stryker, Edwards Life Sciences, and a range of other businesses that I know the Honourable Lady gives a lot of support to. I will write to her listing all those things, and then I will make sure that it is available on the website of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Tim Farrell.
Speaker, the tech sector in rural Cumbria depends obviously on reliable broadband, and yet communities in Warcop, Sandford, Coupland-Beck, Bleetarn and Ormside in Westmoreland, who have signed up to the community interest company and volunteer group Barn to provide a gigabit connection for just £33 a month, but the communities have been suddenly designated a low priority area, meaning that their vouchers have been removed, putting the whole system and the whole project at risk. I wonder if the Minister would commit, the Chancellor would commit, to supporting those communities and the residents and businesses within them, ensuring that they get the vouchers that they were initially promised.
Well, I will happily look into what's happening. We strongly support all rural areas having access to gigabit broadband. It's a very important part of our policy. We made a lot of progress in that area. I'll look into the details of what's happening in his area and get back to him.
Ben Lake.
Question number 11, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, hospitality businesses play an important role in local communities and the UK economy. They benefit from business rates support worth £13.6 billion over the next 5 years, which includes an increased generosity for the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Relief Scheme from 50% to 75% in 2023-24. And of course, there is our Brexit pub guarantee, which means the duty on a draft pint in a pub will always be lower than its equivalent in the supermarket.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Minister for that answer. She will be aware, of course, of long-standing calls from the sector for reducing the rate of VAT to bring it in line with European equivalents. Would it be possible at all for the Treasury to undertake an assessment of the economic benefits of doing so, and perhaps also consider as a package increasing the threshold for VAT registration from £85,000 to £100,000 to support smaller businesses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman poses many questions for me, some of which are very complicated. In short, in relation to the VAT relief for the hospitality sector, it was really important we did that in the aftermath of the pandemic, but it cost us a great deal of money, and so we've had to raise it back up to 20%. In relation to other VAT matters, of course, we keep these under review, and I'd be delighted to meet him to discuss some of the complexities behind this with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I look at the new job opportunities and career paths that are being created in Pembrokeshire, a great many of those are being created in the tourism and hospitality sector. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the very last thing that business people who are creating those growth opportunities need right now is a tourism tax of the kind being brought forward by the Welsh Labour government in Cardiff that will hit these businesses with new burdens and raise the cost for going on holiday in Wales?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the sun always shines in my right honourable friend's corner of Pembrokeshire when he speaks up for it. And he's quite right to identify how the Conservatives in government are trying to help these businesses through our business rates relief in England, through our energy support scheme over recent months, and of course through the Brexit pub guarantee. Welsh Labour, on the other hand, wants to call last orders and have higher taxes for those businesses he's so keen to support.
The Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2019 Conservative Manifesto, some 3 Prime Ministers ago and 4 Chancellors ago, promised a fundamental reform of business rates. This is another broken Tory promise. Will the Minister admit that only a Labour government will end the chaos, scrap business rates and replace them with a fairer system so that our amazing hospitality sector can thrive and grow faster?
Minister.
Well, I have a great deal of respect for the Honourable Lady. I must point out to her gently that we have in fact conducted that review, and in the autumn statement we were able to announce a £13.6 billion package of help over the next 5 years, including a multiplier freeze for all ratepayers large and small, a transitional relief cap that is funded by the Exchequer, as well as retail, hospitality and leisure relief, and a small business support scheme which will help cap bill increases at £600 per year for businesses losing eligibility for some or all small businesses, or the rural rate relief for the 2023 evaluation. We've done that review and we're supporting those businesses that need the help.
Alan Brown.
Question 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to answer questions 13 and 22 together. Advanced economies around the world are sharing in the challenge of high inflation from the energy shock, and the UK has been affected by these global factors. The government has taken significant action to help households with rising energy prices and the cost of living by providing a significant support package totalling £94 billion. This includes supporting households with energy bills by extending the energy price guarantee and removing the premium paid by 4 million households using prepayment meters. Overall, the government has paid about half of a typical household bill since October 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many people in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland will have their taxes used to help pay for the construction of the gas grid, despite the fact that they're actually off the gas grid themselves and don't actually get the benefits of being connected to the gas grid. Their area supplies the oil and gas and now the cheap renewable energy that's facilitating lower energy bills across Great Britain, but yet these people are more likely to be fuel poor, and to rub salt in the wounds, many pay a surcharge on their electricity bills. So when's the UK Government going to address these inequities?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I would simply point out that across the United Kingdom we've provided extensive support, as I said in my answer to the substantive. I'm very happy to write to him with details on his specific point.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When the Energy Profits Levy was introduced to help this government's support of household energy bills, I welcomed the investment tax allowance that was introduced along with it on new oil and gas for energy security. In recent weeks, I also welcomed the Exchequer Secretary announcement in Aberdeen of a price floor in the form of an energy security investment mechanism at which the EPL will be removed. The devil, of course, will be in the detail, and while I welcome the Treasury's ongoing engagement and dialogue with the oil and gas industry, can I ask the Minister if he will commit to a regular, perhaps quarterly, fiscal forum with the industry, as used to happen prior to COVID? And does my honourable friend agree that Labour's plans to ban all new oil and gas is based on ideology and not a pragmatic approach to this country's energy security and net zero?
Can I just say, I think you ought to put in for a German, it will be easier for all of us. Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can think of a few better advocates of the oil and gas industry than my honourable friend. I was very pleased to meet with industry leaders and chair of the Oil and Gas Forum in Aberdeen. Recently, we had a very good discussion. I'm grateful to the industry for their ongoing engagement with ministers and officials. I can assure my friend the government is very committed to engaging with the oil and gas sector, as we have been doing for a long time.
Number 14.
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as per my previous response on this same question by the honourable gentleman in last Treasury orals, I would note that the UK has grown at a similar rate to comparable European economies since 2016, and that it still remains challenging to separate out the effects of Brexit and wider global trends on the UK economy, but we remain absolutely committed to seizing the opportunities that we now have free from the EU.
Mr. Speaker, yes, that's very convenient. Only the UK has to deal with Brexit. Everyone's had to deal with COVID. Everyone's had to deal with Ukraine. Only the UK has had to deal with Brexit. And that's why the LSE says that customers have paid collectively almost £7 billion extra on their food bills as a direct result of all the checks and frustrations that have come with Brexit. Is she honestly saying that it was a good idea and that it's not hurt the UK economy?
Minister.
Again, I would just gently remind the honourable gentleman to look at what is happening in the rest of the EU. So, for example, the EU zone is suffering from the effects of mild recession. These are because of the global headwinds we are all facing. I know he will be delighted at the recent upgrades in growth by the OBR, the Bank of England, and the OECD. The truth is that we face these challenges. We, of course, have to work with our global counterparts to try to address these global headwinds, but we are very much focused on the Prime Minister's priority of halving inflation, because that is what will make the real differences to our constituents.
John Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me that despite Project Fair forecasts, we have record employment, very low unemployment, good inward investment and trade deals in abundance? And perhaps the SNB should focus on its poor record on the economy and indeed financial transparency and get over the fact that we've left the EU.
Well, my honourable friend puts it very succinctly. And may I take this opportunity to congratulate him on his recent honour. Very well deserved. He puts it very succinctly. We have a really exciting future ahead of us. We're already signing trade deals with non-EU countries. We have this fantastic deal with the EU. It's now up to us to make a real success of this.
Peter Alden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Number 16.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government recognises the challenges facing households due to the elevated costs of living and took further action at spring budget this year to provide targeted support to protect the most vulnerable. This included the new cost of living payments in this year, support with the cost of essentials through a further extension to the Household Support Fund in England, and upgrading benefits in line with inflation in April this year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for that answer. One of the best ways to support those on low incomes is to remove those barriers that prevent them from acquiring the new skills that are necessary for better paid jobs. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the Treasury is working closely with the Department for Education and the DWP to ensure that the Lifelong Learning Bill gets rid of those obstacles? And can she also provide an update on the progress of the Barber Review?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know how you like ministers to answer shortly, so if I may, I'll answer the first part and come back to him on the Barber Review in writing. First of all, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, put employment as one of the 4 E's in his drive for growth in the spring budget, and we are working very closely with the Department for Education to invest in exactly the way he describes, including free courses for jobs which enable high-value level 3 subjects to have free qualifications, and also employer-led skills boot camps in high-growth areas, a phrase I never thought I'd find myself saying, but those are apparently for sectors such as digital and other growth sectors available to those who are unemployed or in work and want to retrain.
Dr. Rupa.
Speaker, food banks, playgroups and warm spaces are among the services that have been provided by mosques, temples, synagogues and churches to all our constituents to cope with this cost of living crisis, but the buildings they're in are often creaking and falling apart. So I wondered if ministers would consider extending Gordon Brown's original policy for VAT relief on building works for listed places of worship to all of them, to recognise their role in social good and alleviating pressure on multiple systems.
I think you're right.
Well, may I thank the Honourable Lady for raising an important point. And there has been an incredible outpouring of support across communities, not just in religious communities, but also in village and town halls around the United Kingdom to try to help people with the cost of living pressures that we're facing over this winter. I understand the point she makes. If I may, it's quite a complicated picture, but perhaps I can write to her with a fuller response on that, because I want to do it justice in my response, Mr. Speaker, and I know I'll get into trouble with you.
Richard Bergen, then.
Question number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 3 things the government's doing to reduce inflation. Firstly, remaining steadfast in our support of the independent MPC of the Bank of England as they take action to return inflation to its target of 2%. Secondly, making difficult but responsible decisions on tax and spending, so we're not adding fuel to the fire. And thirdly, tackling high energy prices by holding down energy bills for households and businesses alongside investing in long-term energy security.
Richard Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rich and powerful have repeatedly sought to blame workers for high inflation, even though workers' real wages have been falling as inflation soars. But many leading economists now say that the profiteering of certain corporations is driving price rises, not wages. The French government has taken action to limit food prices. Spain has introduced rent controls. When will this government start targeting the profiteering that's helping to drive inflation?
Minister.
Well, we continue to have constructive dialogue with industry in different sectors. I met with the supermarket representatives a few weeks ago. The Chancellor and others in the Treasury will continue to have those conversations. But I think most people recognise that we face global common challenges and different economies will respond in different ways.
Now come to top Bittles. John Barrett.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We won't hesitate in our resolve to support the Bank of England as it seeks to strangle inflation in the economy. And the best policy is to stick to our plan to halve it. But I also want to make sure we do everything possible to help families paying higher mortgage rates in ways that do not themselves feed inflation. So later this week I'll be meeting the principal mortgage lenders to ask what help they can give to people struggling to pay for more expensive mortgages and what flexibilities might be possible for families in arrears.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite being the gateway to most financial services in the city, the London Stock Exchange, I suggest, is ailing, with CRH and ARM being the latest canaries in the coal mine. Whilst welcoming the Edinburgh reforms, what further consideration has he given to my suggestion that tax incentives be introduced to encourage our British pension funds, the big beasts, to invest more in UK equities, given that since the financial crisis of 2008-9, they've reduced their exposure to equities by 90%, unlike most other developed economies?
Chancellor.
Well, my honourable friend always speaks extremely wisely on financial matters, and he's absolutely on the money when he talks about the opportunity that presents itself from unlocking £3 trillion of pension fund assets. Many of which would get a better return for pensioners if they were invested more in our high-growth businesses, as well as that being a good outcome for the London stock market. And all I would say to him is watch this space.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the government squabble over parties and peerages, mortgage products are being withdrawn and replaced by mortgages with much higher interest rates. This is a consequence of the Conservative mini-budget last year and 13 years of economic failure, with inflation higher here than in similar countries. Average mortgage payments will be going up by a crippling £2,900 this year. So where does the Chancellor think that families are going to get the money to pay the Tory mortgage penalty?
Well, let me tell her that we announced at the autumn statement £94 billion of support to help families going through very difficult times. That was more support than was ever proposed by Labour. But I'll tell her what the answer to those pressures is not. It's not borrowing an extra £28 billion a year when people like Paul Johnson are saying more borrowing means higher inflation, higher interest rates and higher mortgage rates.
Rachel Reeves.
Is the Chancellor actually for real? This is the real-life consequences of what is happening under the Conservative government today. So don't try and pass the buck. Let me bring this home. In Selby and Ainsty, 12,000 households will be paying an average of £2,700 more on their mortgages. In Uxbridge and South Ruislip, 10,000 households will be paying on average £5,200 more. Each and every family knows who is responsible for trashing the economy. It is the Conservative Party. So will the Chancellor apologise for the harm that his government have caused with the Tory mortgage penalty?
I am proud of our economic record, which has seen our economy grow faster than France or Japan since 2010, the same rate as Germany. And let me say that those mortgage holders in Selby or Uxbridge or Mid-Bedfordshire will be paying even more for their mortgages if the government under a Labour Party borrowed £100 billion more in the next Parliament, and we won't let that happen.
Greg Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister knows, having a strong insurance and financial services sector is vital to the growth of our economy, which is one of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges. So can he confirm that he's doing everything in his powers to make that happen, particularly with a view to our international competitiveness in these key sectors?
I can give my honourable friend the assurance he seeks. He will know from his significant contribution to the Financial Services and Markets Bill as it's gone through this House that it does introduce a new duty on our financial regulators to promote the growth and international competitiveness of the United Kingdom. But alongside that, it also, thanks to my honourable friend, has specific reporting measures as to how they're going to achieve that important objective.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently I met with the Minister for Schools and presented him with his costed proposal for a pilot of universal free school meals in Liverpool. The Minister said he wasn't ideologically opposed to this, but that all roads lead to the Treasury. So here we are. Will the Chancellor work with me and the Minister to enable this pilot, which would transform the education, health and well-being of thousands of children across my great city?
Hear, hear.
Who wants it?
I'll happily write to him to talk to him about that particular initiative. What I would say to him is we are making great progress in our schools. We've risen to 4th in the global league tables when it comes to reading, but we can always do more.
Sir David Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to making inflation and the cost of living his top priority. This is also a top priority of my constituents in Bexley Heath and Crayford. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the IFS is entirely correct that Labour's plans for £28 billion of borrowing in their Green Prosperity Plan would simply lead to higher rates of interest and higher inflation?
Chancellor.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. The answer to inflation is to tackle it, not to make it worse.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wages in real terms are lower now than what they were in 2008. It's an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker. The North East has been hit harder than other regions, and worst of all for child poverty. The child poverty rates have shot up, resulting in 67% of children in working families living in poverty. Is the Chancellor's deliberate, brutal policy of wage suppression working? If so, who for?
Chancellor.
Let me say to the honourable gentleman that we understand the pressures that families are going through up and down the country, but we have responded not only with generous support this year and last of over £3,000 for the average household, but since 2010, the number of children in absolute poverty has fallen by 400,000.
Paying around half the cost of people's energy bills and freezing fuel duty has been crucial in helping people with the cost of living, but is there further action the government can take to get inflation down, and are we on track to halve it by the end of the year?
It's a relentless activity to control public spending and to ensure that the interventions we're making prioritise growth enablement. The Household Support Fund of £2.5 billion continues to be an additional source of support for households, but there aren't quick fixes. There is a relentless pursuit of the goals that we've set out at the start of this year.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How on earth can the Chancellor begin to understand the worries of ordinary homeowners when in 2018 it had seemingly slipped his mind to declare that he had spent £3.5 million buying 7 luxury flats as an investment opportunity in Southampton? Isn't the reality, Mr. Speaker, that him and the Treasury front bench are completely out of touch with what homeowners are facing?
Chancellor.
With respect to the honourable gentleman, I think he should get his facts right before making that kind of suggestion. He got them wrong.
Thanks for Thursday.
And a Firth.
Mr. Speaker, in-person banking facilities are vitally important to everyone in Southend West, yet in recent years we've lost all but one of our bank branches. There's now a new community-based post office banking hub model being rolled out, so would the Minister support my efforts to get one of these into Leigh-on-Sea?
Yes.
Well, I thank the young woman for her question. She will know that as part of the Financial Services and Markets Bill, I can update the House that the government's moved an amendment to protect free access to cash withdrawal and deposit facility. But I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss her own individual constituency's needs.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Government recent pronouncements in relation to food security have been very welcome, But if they are to be meaningful, then farmers and crofters need certainty about the future shape of government support and, critically, the amount of money that will be available to fund that. So can the Chancellor tell us when he will engage with DEFRA and the devolved administrations about the size of the budget that will be available, and if in the meantime he would meet with me in the NFUS?
Well, as he knows, that the farming support payment is ported to Scotland, and it operates on a different basis because it's devolved. We've committed to the 2.4 billion for the duration of this Parliament, and there are a number of schemes where the uptake is now increasing. I will continue to engage with my colleagues from DEFRA as those schemes develop further.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, the last bank in the entirety of Cheadle constituency is about to close. So I was delighted when, following my interventions and direct conversations with Link and appeals from the community, that Bramall was Link's 100th banking hub recommendation. This will be invaluable for residents, but until it opens, my residents will be left without banking services. Would my honourable friend please look into bridging options for the interim between bank closures and hub openings, or consider imposing requirements for banks to remain open until a hub is implemented?
I'll be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to talk about the range of options. I'm delighted about the solution that is being proposed for Bramall in her own constituency, as I was to visit the new banking hub in the constituency, the honourable member for Ealing Central and Acton last week, and I hope the whole House would wish the operator Vip Varsani well in that new endeavour.
Sir Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the first time in my 20 years as an MP, we have a real housing crisis in the Rhondda. 2/3 of people own their own homes, but lots of people who've relied on the commercial rented sector are finding that landlords, because of decisions made about taxation, are selling their properties, and because there's a cap on housing benefit, they're not wanting to continue in that market. We have dozens of people being evicted week in, week out at the moment. Will the government please look very closely at what is happening in constituencies such as mine to protect people so that they can keep their own homes?
Well, Minister.
I'm very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman to discuss what's happening in his constituency. Obviously, there have been a series of changes since the Section 24 change in the Finance Act in 2015, and obviously particular pressures in the housing economy at the moment. But I'm happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the work that the Chancellor and Prime Minister have done to promote the work here of artificial intelligence and developing an ecosystem for that. It's clear that the UK has got an opportunity to really lead on this, especially on regulation, if we get it right, but only if we seize that opportunity now. What's the Chancellor doing to make that happen?
Chancellor.
Well, my right honourable friend is right to say this is a big opportunity. We're home to 1/3 of Europe's AI startups, but we are very aware of the risks of AI. So what the government is doing is hosting a global AI summit with the support of President Biden this autumn to make sure we get that regulation absolutely right.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite rightly, this question time has been dominated by questions on inflation and cost of living. But one policy which has not been mentioned is the government's net zero policy and the inflationary costs included in it, from green levies of 12 billion to the cost of strengthening the infrastructure and also the favourable treatment to renewable energy firms. While the Minister may condemn the Labour Party for its 29 billion spending on green policies, what is the cost of net zero policies to consumers, and is it not picking their pockets dry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a world-leading track record on net zero, but we have to have the correct balance between who bears the costs. And the critical to the nature of his question is mobilising more private capital, and we are making great strides on that point.
Peter Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, can my right honourable friend update the House as to when we will see spades in the ground on the Brunswick site in Darlington for the Darlington Economic Campus?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a great champion for Darlington, and Darlington's economic campus is a critical part of levelling up. The Government Property Agency have been working hard to finalise commercial negotiations, and I'm very happy to write to my honourable friend when I have a more substantive update.
Mr. Speaker, ever-increasing food prices mean that some families are having to cut down on the amount they eat. So will the Minister support Labour's plan to negotiate a new veterinary agreement for agriculture products to reduce the cost for food producers and bring down those crippling food prices?
Who wants? Chancellor.
We'll always look at Labour policies, but they're normally not right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clear policy direction and a strong regulatory framework has led to the UK being the world's leading centre in fintech. Does my honourable friend agree that the crypto industry offers the same opportunity to the UK to exploit?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. I was pleased to join him in a Westminster Hall debate about the regulation of the crypto asset sector. I commend the work done in this House by the all-party parliamentary group on crypto assets. And he might join me in welcoming the decision by Andreessen Horowitz, one of the world's largest technology companies, to locate their only international office outside of San Francisco here in the UK and to run their 2024 crypto asset school here.
Exercise Cygnus in 2016 tested the country's preparedness for a pandemic. Was the government's response at that time adequate, and what can he do in his current role to make sure that we're properly prepared in the future?
Chancellor.
Well, I am looking forward to answering questions about that tomorrow afternoon at the COVID inquiry. What I would say to him is that I think we did what was recommended following Operation Cygnus. Certainly ministers did what they were advised to do, but it was focused on pandemic flu. And the question we have to ask ourselves is why we didn't have a broader focus on the different types of pandemic that could have happened, such as COVID.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's business rates review last autumn was anything but fundamental because it didn't even look at the calculations for fair and maintainable trade, which are hammering the viability of pubs in St Albans. So if the Chancellor has in fact abandoned his commitment for a fundamental review of business rates, which he himself called for last summer, will he at least look at the calculations for fair and maintainable trade before any more of our valuable pubs have to close?
Minister.
As I say, we conducted a review and we had the £13.6 billion package of support to help businesses on our high streets. If she's able to look at, for example, the multiplier freeze, that has a significant impact on those rates, as does the retail, hospitality and leisure relief, which will help raise the rate of relief from 50% to 75%. We've targeted this very carefully at exactly the businesses she's raising.
Patrick Reid.
Speaker, the Chancellor was shaking his head during my question earlier on, so I wonder if he can say whether or not he accepts the findings from the London School of Economics Centre for Economic Performance that shows that Brexit is responsible for a third of UK price inflation since 2019. Regulatory, sanitary and other border checks added almost £7 billion to total domestic grocery bills over the period from December 2019 to March 2023. Does he accept that or not?
No.
Jim Shannon.
You were first.
Right, let's move on.